The storm had taken everything light, sound, color direction. It howled like a wounded animal through the valley, snapping fence posts like twigs and dragging the last of Evelyn Marsh's firewood into the snow. She was just sealing the final shutter when she heard it. Not the groan of her old barn, not the crack of ice slipping from the roof, but something else. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. A cry, high-pitched, fragile, human, her breath caught in her chest. She stood there, one hand on the latch and the other still gripping a nail lips, parted like she was about to speak, but no words came. Only that cry again. Closer now, piercing through the white roar like a heartbeat in a void. She didn't hesitate. Coat, boots, no hat, no rifle. She pushed the door open into the storm, the wind clawing at her face like it had a grudge to settle. Visibility was gone. Just white spinning madness and the burn of ice slicing her cheeks. But she didn't stop. Evelyn moved by instinct, not by sight. 10 paces past the paddock, she stumbled, then fell. Something beneath her knees. A bundle, half buried in the snow. She tore at the cloth with her hands stiff from cold. Red fabric stiff with ice. Inside movement. A sound. A face. A baby, barely breathing. Lips blue. Forehead bloodied with a shallow cut. Long dried dark. Evelyn reached for it with a gasp. She didn't know she made lifting the child to her chest. She could feel its chill through the layers. Too cold, far too cold. The fabric wrapped around the child bore strange patterns. Symbols, hand-stitched. Tribal. She recognized them. Kiowa. The storm howled again, louder now, like it was angry she'd found him. Evelyn turned her back to the wind, wrapped her arms tighter, and ran. Snow clawed at her legs. The cold bit into her lungs. She didn't care. All that mattered was the weight in her arms. And that for the first time in 5 years, something was alive in them again. The cabin door slammed shut behind her, muffling the storm to a dull, distant roar. Evelyn collapsed to her knees beside the hearth of the baby still cradled in her arms. Her breath came in hard, ragged pulls. The child didn't cry anymore, not from strength, she knew, but from weakness. She stripped off her gloves and reached for the nearest wool blanket, wrapping the infant tight. Then the fire she threw 2 more logs on, shoved the coals until they sparked. Heat roared back into the room, making the walls glow with an amber shimmer. The baby's skin was cold as polished stone. She whispered nonsense as she moved little murmurs, syllables she hadn't used in years, as if the words themselves might bring life back to the child's lips. She laid him on her lap, pressed her fingers to his neck. A pulse, faint but there. He was fighting, and so would she. She boiled water, dampened cloths, wiped his tiny brow. Checked for fever. Nothing yet, but his breathing was shallow, uneven. He needed warmth, he needed rest, and above all, he needed her to stay awake. She sat in the old rocking chair her mother's once and held the child against her chest, gently swaying. The wind outside howled like it was circling a kill, but inside the world was still. Still and sacred. Only then did she notice the cloth wrapped around him. It wasn't random. The stitching, though frayed, was careful. Symbols repeated across it, half-moons, arrows, fire patterns. She blinked. Kiowa. She'd lived near the Kiowa nations her whole life. Her late husband had traded horses with them before the war had turned neighbors into enemies. She turned the baby over gently, and that's when she saw it a necklace, bone carved smooth and worn with age, tied with rawhide. It hung around the child's neck like a blessing or a warning. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she lifted it slightly. A clan mark, not just Kiowa. Important. This child was no orphan by chance. She swallowed hard, heart thudding. A chieftain's son, maybe, or a warrior's only blood. She looked down at him. His face had softened. Lips parted and sleep hands curled like leaves in the cold. So small, so terribly alone, and somehow so familiar. Evelyn rocked him slowly, the chair creaking like a whisper in the dark. "I had a son," once she said, a loud voice, barely audible above the fire. It wasn't something she often spoke even to herself. 5 years ago, one careless afternoon. One tree branch, one startled horse, one broken spine. His name had been Samuel. She hadn't spoken that name in years. And now, this child dropped from the sky, like some test of mercy, was laying against her chest, warming her skin, breathing the breath of the living. She wiped her cheek only then, realizing she'd been crying. "I don't know who you are," she whispered, "or what storm brought you to me. But I'll keep you safe." The child stirred, not waking, just shifting as if her voice had reached some deeper place in him. And outside, the wind paused for a heartbeat, like it was listening. By dawn, the storm had eased into a thick gray silence. Snow blanketed everything, rooftops sagged, fence lines vanished, and even the trees bowed under the weight. Evelyn hadn't slept, not even a doze. She kept the baby against her chest the entire night, waking him every hour to check his breath, his warmth. He'd made it through, but Evelyn knew survival wasn't just about weather anymore. She changed his wrappings slowly, carefully, using what little linen she had left. His skin was soft now, no longer death cold. The cut on his temple had dried clean. A bruise near his elbow had begun to bloom a soft purple. But what truly froze her, what made her heart skip, was how his fingers curled around hers when she reached down. He held on. That morning, she barely had time to boil coffee before the sound of hooves cracked across the field. She stepped onto the porch, heart thudding under her shawl. A lone rider approached from the east, leaning forward on a worn saddle-long coat flapping behind him. Boreding, her nearest neighbor, 50-something. Grizzled, sun-baked, and always with that smell of tobacco and rye. "Evelyn," he called, reining in beside her gate. "You all right?" She kept her voice level. "I'm fine. Storm raised hell out here. Ripped the roof off the henhouse." He squinted at her cabin. "Saw smoke from town yesterday. Thought I'd ride up, make sure the place hadn't burned to ash." "I appreciate it." Bo didn't dismount. He shifted in the saddle, one hand on the horn, the other resting lazily on his hip. Someone said they saw tracks out this way. Fresh ones. Right before the blizzard rolled in. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Probably mine." "Maybe," he said, unconvinced. His eyes drifted toward her porch, toward the windows. "You see anyone pass through?" She looked him square. Just snow. A beat passed between them, too quiet, too measured. Finally, Bo tipped his hat. "You be careful now. Word is a hunting party went missing Kiowa, they say. About a week ago, maybe more." She nodded. "I'll keep my doors locked." He didn't ride off right away, just lingered, watching her, watching the house. Then he turned and rode back into the trees. Inside, Evelyn sagged against the door. Her breath trembled out of her lungs. The child slept peacefully, swaddled in a basket lined with old wool and a prayer. That night, he woke crying. Not with hunger, not with pain, but with something deeper. A fear too old for words. Evelyn walked slow circles around the cabin, holding him tight, humming a lullaby she hadn't used since her son died. The same lullaby her own mother had sung during storms. Her voice cracked on the third verse, and she didn't try to finish it. Instead, she whispered into the baby's ear, "You're safe now. I've got you." In the silence that followed, she could almost feel her son's presence beside the fire. Not as a ghost, but as warmth. As memory. The next morning, another visitor came. Mrs. Abigail Lane, wife of the pastor, high collar, buttoned to her chin, expression sharp enough to cut kindling. She brought bread and a cloth napkin and concern wrapped in suspicion. "Fence get damaged?" she asked without waiting to be invited inside. A little Evelyn replied, arms crossed. "I've handled worse. Need help mending. I've got it." Mrs. Lane glanced around the yard, eyes landing on the woodpile, the unshoveled path, the faint tracks still visible beneath new snow. Then she looked toward the window. Anyone stop by? Evelyn tilted her head. You mean, has the Lord sent me a stranger in the night? Mrs. Lane didn't smile. Someone said there were riders near Widow's Ridge. Tribal. Thought you ought to know. I've been busy surviving, Evelyn said. Haven't seen a soul. Well, the woman straightened her spine. Just be careful. Not everyone out here has good intentions. Evelyn took the bread with a stiff nod. Appreciate the warning. She shut the door before another word could pass between them. Behind her, the baby stirred in the basket. She picked him up, held him against her chest, and whispered, "The world's watching. We'll just have to stay quiet." But deep down, she knew silence wouldn't keep them safe for long. The snow might have softened, but the danger, it was just beginning to knock. The wind shifted after nightfall. It no longer screamed, it whispered. Evelyn stood by the window, rocking the baby slowly. The fire hissed behind her. Shadows moved across the floor like ghosts, too polite to knock. The baby had fallen into a shallow sleep, his breath soft against the wool blanket wrapped around him. But Evelyn couldn't rest. Something was different tonight. The kind of stillness that didn't comfort it, warned. She'd moved the rifle from the mantel to the table hours ago. Checked it twice, then 3 times. Not because she wanted to fight, but because she knew if it came, it wouldn't knock first. Just after midnight, she saw them. 3 riders. They emerged from the tree line like shapes peeled from the dark. Silent, deliberate. Horses padded over the snow without snort or stumble. No torches, no sound. Just presence. She didn't reach for the gun. Didn't move. The child stirred against her chest but didn't cry. Maybe he knew. Maybe he remembered. The riders stopped 20 yards from the porch. None of them dismounted. For a long while, they didn't move at all. Then the one in the center, a man draped in buffalo hide face, marked with ceremonial paint, slid off his horse and knelt. Not toward her, but near the chicken coop. He ran his hand over the snow, examining, tracking, following something. Evelyn's breath froze in her throat. They know. But then he turned, faced the window where she stood, and bowed his head once, deliberate. Then without a word he mounted again, and the 3 vanished back into the woods as quiet as they had come. Evelyn didn't move for several minutes. Her knees locked, her spine rigid. Only when the fire cracked behind her did she remember how to breathe. She whispered not to the baby, not to herself, but to the air. They know. That morning, the sky turned the color of steel. Snow had melted just enough to leave behind a slick crust of ice and mud. She stepped outside, cautious, scanning the edge of the woods. Nothing, but at the gate hanging on the post was something that hadn't been there yesterday. A charm, carved bone strung with thin leather tied to a piece of red cloth. Her fingers trembled as she untied it. The leather was worn, the carving intricate. It matched the symbols she'd seen on the baby's necklace. A sign, not a threat, a recognition. And carved into the wood below the post, just above the frost line, were 3 words in uneven English. He lives, we saw. That afternoon, the silence grew so heavy, she could feel it pressing against the windows. Even the birds had gone quiet. Then from the ridge, a sound rolled like thunder. Hooves, dozens, no hundreds. She stepped onto the porch, baby in arms. What she saw made her legs lock in place. Across the ridge, stretching down the hill like a black ribbon spilling over snow, rode a procession of Kiowa warriors. 100 strong, maybe more. Dressed in feathers leather paint. Silent. No shouting. No noise but the rumble of horses and the whisper of fate. At the front rode a man cloaked in red. Broad-shouldered. Tall. A scar traced the left side of his jaw like lightning over dry land. He dismounted 50 yards away. Alone he walked, no weapon in hand. Each step deliberate, slow, Snow crunched beneath his boots, the only sound between them. Evelyn didn't back away. She stood there, the baby pressed tight against her chest, as the man stopped at the base of her steps. "You saved my son," he said. His voice was deep, measured. Evelyn nodded. "I did. He was not left behind by mistake. His mother died in the ambush. We thought he had gone with her. But he cried." She looked down at the child. "And I heard him." He nodded slowly. "You heard my blood scream, and you answered." There was a long silence. Then he asked, "Will you give him back to me?" She didn't reply at first. The snow creaked under her boots as she shifted. "Will you take him from me if I say no?" He blinked once. "No." She swallowed. "I wasn't trying to keep him. But I wasn't ready to lose him either." "You did not lose him," he said softly. "You brought him back." The child stirred in her arms, but didn't cry. The man stepped forward gently, reverently, and touched the boy's foot. "You are now a part of his story," he said. "And in our way, that makes you blood." He raised one hand. From the ridge, a rider broke off a woman in blue, holding a cradle board and something else. A necklace brighter and newer than the one the baby wore. A sign, a name, and perhaps a promise. The woman in blue dismounted with the grace of someone used to silence. Her cloak shimmered with beads and feathers, but her eyes, steady and deep, carried no hostility. Only history. In one hand, she held a cradle board hand-woven from willow and leather, lined with protective symbols and soft fur. In the other, a necklace newer than the one Evelyn had taken from the child's neck. This one was brighter, carefully carved. A gift and a declaration. The war chief stepped back to let the woman approach. She stood at the base of the steps, eyes level with Evelyn's. "In our tongue," she said, her voice low and deliberate, "we call you Wayanani." Evelyn blinked. "What does it mean?" The one who heard. The words settled between them like smoke. Evelyn looked down at the child in her arms. His tiny fingers were wrapped around the edge of her shawl. He wasn't sleeping, just watching her, as if he already knew what was coming. "I suppose I'm expected to give him back now," she said softly. The woman didn't answer with words. She simply held the cradle board forward. It was beautiful, so carefully made, built to protect, to carry, to belong. Evelyn didn't reach for it. "I don't want to say goodbye," she whispered, voice trembling. "But I know I was never meant to keep him." "No," the woman said. "But you were meant to save him." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Can I see where he'll go?" she asked. The woman nodded once. They didn't ride fast. Evelyn brought her old mule, wrapped the baby in the red shawl again, and rode beside the woman through snow-laced trails, up the slope that opened into a clearing tucked between the trees. There, beneath a stand of pines, sat the encampment. Tents made of hide and canvas, smoke rising in soft curls, children chasing one another barefoot through the snow, laughter and bark of lazy dogs echoing between them. It didn't feel like danger. It felt like life. The warriors who had arrived earlier were mostly gone, dispersed like storm clouds now that the threat had passed. Only the red-cloaked chief remained seated by the central fire. He stood when they approached. No weapons, no ceremony, just presence. Evelyn dismounted and took a deep breath. The boy stirred in her arms. She stepped forward slowly, one foot then another, until she stood in front of the man. "I didn't know if you'd wait," she said, offering the child gently. "I wait," he replied, "for what is mine and what is sacred." He took the child in both arms, carefully, with the reverence of a man receiving more than blood, receiving a second chance. The baby didn't cry. He looked up at the man like he knew. Evelyn stepped back, not in fear, but in finality. But before she could retreat, the chief reached into a pouch and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He placed it in her hands. Inside was a pendant bone and turquoise, worn smooth by time. A mark of guardianship in their tribe, a symbol of those who protect the sacred. "He will know your name," the chief said. "I already do," came a voice behind them. It was the woman in blue. She stepped forward and placed a hand gently on Evelyn's shoulder. "In our stories," she said, "we do not call you the white woman who saved him. We call you Natu Ana." Evelyn looked up, and that means she who walks between worlds. For a long time, Evelyn said nothing. She just looked at the baby one last time, held now in arms that belonged to blood, but with eyes that still searched for her. Then, in a voice low and sure, she said, "Tell him I didn't just save his life." She met the woman's gaze. "He saved mine." They rode back before dusk, Evelyn trailing the scent of pine and campfire. She didn't cry. Not then. But that night, back in her cabin, she stood before the mantel where the pendant now lay lit only by firelight. She ran a finger over its carving, then turned toward the empty cradle by the stove. And for the first time in 5 years, her home didn't feel empty. It felt shared. Winter faded like a song remembered too late. The snow melted into thick mud along the edges of Evelyn's land. The fences leaned from the weight of weeks gone by, and the windmill creaked with every gust as if mourning something it never knew. But inside her home, the fire stayed lit. Each morning she lit it before sunrise. And every Sunday she baked 2 loaves of cornbread, one for herself and one she left on the flat stone beside the creek, tucked beneath the tree, where the child's cry had once pierced the storm. She never looked back. But each time by morning the second loaf was gone. She didn't speak of it. Not to the pastor's wife when she asked. Not to Bo Redding when he rode by again and muttered about wild spirits in the woods. Evelyn simply nodded, smiled, and returned to her chores. Until one morning she found something on her porch. A ribbon, red, frayed at the ends, tied carefully around the doorknob, fluttering in the breeze. Attached to it was a scrap of paper folded unevenly. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The writing was clumsy, the letters shaky. 5 words, "I miss you, Ma." She didn't cry right away. She just stood there in the doorway, paper pressed to her chest, and closed her eyes. Later that evening, she placed the note in the same wooden chest, where she kept the necklace, the pendant, and a small red shawl she'd never had the heart to wash. Her fingers lingered on the latch, as if locking the box sealed something sacred. Then came the knock. Soft, steady, familiar. She opened the door before it came again. There he was, standing, barefoot, hair braided, eyes wide and bright. The child no longer swaddled, no longer a whisper, was now a boy. Taller than she remembered, with cheeks flushed from the cold, and the trace of a smile too big for his small face. He said nothing, just walked forward, placed both hands on her skirt, and looked up. "Ma," he whispered. Evelyn dropped to her knees. Her arms wrapped around him before she could think, and her voice broke in the hollow of his shoulder. "I hoped you'd come back standing." He laughed a quick, bright laugh that cracked through the quiet like sunlight through fog. "I came running," he said proudly. "I just walked the last part." Behind him stood the woman in blue, the same calm in her face, the same steady gaze. They stayed 3 nights. The first night the boy asked to sleep in the old cradle beside the stove. She had never moved it, not out of reluctance, but reverence. He climbed into it with a sleepy yawn, pulled the red shawl to his chin, and smiled as if no time had passed. The second night, he asked to sleep on the floor beside her bed. She said yes. They shelled peas together in the kitchen, and he told her about the village, the dogs, of the other boys who raced with sticks for horses. He told her about his father, how he taught him to hunt rabbits, how he said the sky remembers names better than people. Then came the question, "Did I come from your belly?" The world went still. Evelyn looked to the woman in blue, who dropped her gaze in quiet respect. Evelyn set the bowl of peas aside, turned to him, and placed her hand gently over his chest. "No," she said softly. "You didn't come from here?" She tapped her stomach. "But from here." Her hand moved to his heart. The boy blinked, thinking. "Then, that means I have 2 hearts." She smiled, pulling him into her lap. "Yes, sweetheart. And 2 homes." The next morning, they prepared to leave. No ceremony, no sadness, just the quiet weight of understanding. As they mounted their horses, the boy turned back once, From his pouch, he pulled a small stone, smooth and pale, carved with a single feather, and tossed it gently. Evelyn caught it midair. "I'll bring you more," he promised. And then he rode off, not away, but onward. That night, Evelyn sat by the fire and looked at the cradle again. But this time her hands didn't ache. They were full of something else now. Something quiet, something warm, something like love. Spring came late that year. It didn't arrive with flowers or fanfare, just a slow softening of the earth. The frost retreated 1 inch at a time, the creek loosened its voice, and the crows returned loud and confident, as if they'd never left. Evelyn planted tobacco seeds by the porch, a gift from the woman in blue. She mixed them with lavender, then dried small bundles to burn at dusk. The smoke curled up through the rafters like memory made visible. Not prayer, not ritual, just presence. She didn't expect the boy to return again, but she still baked 2 loaves each Sunday. And some weeks the second loaf was gone. Some weeks it wasn't. She didn't mind either way. One morning, while mending the fence behind the barn, she found another feathered stone placed beside the well. No words, no ribbon, just quiet knowing. She smiled, traced the carved groove, and tucked it into the pocket of her apron without a word. Time moved. So did Evelyn, but slower now. Not out of age or weariness, but grace. She didn't talk much in town. Folks no longer asked about the boy or the tribe or the smoke that rose from her chimney at twilight. The whispers had faded, replaced by nods, by quiet glances, by the kind of respect that doesn't need to be spoken. And when she passed away many years later, she wasn't buried in the town cemetery beneath crosses or names she no longer answered to. She was laid to rest near the creek, beneath the pines, in a ring of stones. No grand headstone, just a single wooden plaque, carved with one word, Ma. And now I ask you, if you were that child, half frozen in the snow, lifted from silence by warm hands, would you ever forget the one who held you through the storm? If a stranger saved your life, what would you call them? If you had 2 homes, one of blood and one of love, which one would call you back when the nights grew cold? Maybe the answer isn't a place. Maybe it's a name, whispered in the dark, etched on a stone, folded in a note. If this story stayed with you like a song you didn't know you needed, let it live on. Subscribe for more stories like this one. Stories that remind us sometimes family isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose in the middle of a storm, with your arms open.